So give it up for Kikia Carter.
Thanks, Alex. So let me know if this volume is okay. You guys can hear me pretty fine? Okay, excellent. I'm Kiki. I am from Lightbend, and we have some fellow Lightbend friends over here. Yay, hi friends. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about ethics. And this is a topic I think I put in the abstract, but I'm just going to be really upfront about it right now, that can probably become a little bit touchy. I mean, it's an area where once you get some controversy, you will have some debate, you will have some disagreement, you will hopefully have some strong feelings about it. And I hope to have enough time in the end to leave a little bit of discussion room, or for people to pose questions or pose alternative scenarios in different universes if you'd like to do that as well. The title is Good Code, Bad Coder, and you can sort of from the title get the gist of what we're getting at and what I want to talk about. But I want to be clear on what I mean by bad coder, because bad being not in terms of morality, because morals and ethics, although sometimes they get conflated, they are not the same thing. Morals are something that are internal, and I'll talk a little bit about ethics and where that arises from more externally. But we're really talking about bad being you're crossing ethical boundaries, whether intentional or unintentional. Somehow some ethical boundaries have been crossed. And there's a code of ethics, if you guys are familiar with the ACM, the Association of Computing and Machinery, which is kind of a weird old name that never changed, but basically computer science now. And they've adopted a full code on ethics, and recently, I think in June of 2018, they've gotten a new version of this code of ethics to be updated, you know, with the current world we're in. And this code of ethics that they have is broken up in 3 different parts. It's general ethics, and so that's anybody who's in computer science, anybody who's writing software, developing, testing, working in software. And then there's the professional code, which is any of us who are either researchers or working in corporations, making money with software, anyone who needs to be professional. And then there's a section for leadership. And there are values and ethics that your leader should have. And I actually feel like the section around leadership applies to everyone. So I still draw from the leadership principles for everyone. I feel like everyone should really hone in on these principles. And this entire question of ethics in computer science, it's not a new one. It's one that's been around since computers, or not even modern computers, since things started being automated. Without computers have been around. This question around technology and the ethics of technology has existed. And it seems like every year something happens, some catalyst, some moment happens where we think like, oh no, now we really got to get some ethics about our computers, or oh no, now we've really got to get serious about thinking of the effects of certain technology, or the things we build, or the things we test, the things we release. And to that end, I'd like to start with a real good foundation of what we mean when we talk about ethics. Ethics, again, they're not like morals. Morals are internal, and they may be the same whether or not you're behaving ethically, or maybe you may do something that's outside of ethics because your moral reasons. Ethics are dependent on others for definition. They tend to be consistent within a certain context. It's really a rules of conduct related to a particular class of people, or a group, or a culture. It comes from the outside. It comes from your communities and your society. And when we look at ethics in computers, we're looking at 2 different things. Like Alice said, it all comes down to code and people. And people being the very important part of that. And they both have ways that they influence each other. People are writing the code, and code gets integrated into people's lives, and then they are affected by the code. So there's push on both sides when you look at these principles and you look at the ethics. And they're both impressing upon people. But when you look at it from the beginning, it's all about the people, whether people writing the code, or the people being affected by code, people creating technology, people innovating, or the people who are being affected in good or bad ways by this technology. So we know that there's an individual involved, and we know that we all have individual responsibility, but we also have a community involved when we look at ethics. And the community would be your code pals. Those are the people who you either work with, you either research with, those are your friends on Stack Overflow or Tech Exchange or whatever. In our case, it's our Scala community, the developers and the people who we work with together in our community. We have our community, and we have some ethics within our community, or we should have ethics within our community, and they should be related to things like purpose and intent. What is the purpose of our gathering, of our community, of the things that we build, of the things that we develop, of our area of innovation? What's the intent behind what we do and our mission within the Scala community? Do we know how to be civil? Part of our community and having a strong community is having civility and disagreement. Obviously, we're not going to all think the same way, believe the same things, agree on the same approaches for solving problems, but we have to have some sense of civility around our disagreement. And I'm sure it's kind of weird for me to be standing here saying this given the state of the world today, and I'm from the US and we have zero civil discourse in my country, but I have hope that within our little Scala community, we do have some civility within our discourse. And by having that and doing that, and one of the best ways to do that is to cultivate mindful teams. And it becomes really easy for us, and it's, you know, we have a culture in our community and a lot of developer communities where we're remote a lot of the time. Even if we work with some people on our teams, there's usually someone outside of our team, someone outside of our home, outside of where we are, who we work with on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes that distance allows us to behave in ways where we wouldn't behave if we were sitting next to a person. We can be more brash, or things that we say can be taken with the wrong tone. We can give off wrong tones. So it's very important for those of us who are on teams to really be a part and be intentional about creating mindfulness within our teams so that we don't come off that way, so that we don't lose out on our civility and our way to work together. And that's something that, again, you have to be very, very intentional about. So we have our community, our Scala community, and we have some concerns and ethics that we have within our community, but that's important because we actually branch out into society. And the things that we do, the things we build affect society, and we have society concerns. This comes from the ACM's Code of Ethics, and it's one of the parts that I really, really enjoyed and honed in on. We need to recognize and take care of systems that become integrated into the infrastructure of society. So any systems that we build that really become a part of our society, we need to take special care of those systems. That includes paying, financial systems, travel. If you're looking at government and healthcare, these companies have to take care of these systems. And you have to establish good stewardship and real policies for fair system access when you're creating systems like this. When appropriate standards for care don't exist, we, and this says the Code of Conduct by the ACM, we have the responsibility to ensure that they're developed. When appropriate standards of care do not exist for these systems, we have the responsibility to ensure that they are developed. There are other issues that we have to consider when it comes to society and the ethics in technology. We have to understand that sometimes there are pressures, external pressures around us, and some of those pressures try to push us to make profit over progress. And I know within us we have this idea that we're going to do the right thing, and we want to do the right thing, and we want to make progress. But we also have those competing ideas for profiting. And sometimes we can see, well, if I have profit, I am making progress in a certain way. You have to really look at this in balance and understand, go back again to your intent and your purpose, and understand if you're putting profit over progress to the detriment of your community and society. We have to think about whether or not we're bolstering the right systems. If you're working on systems that are poor systems that aren't meant to do good things, and we know they aren't meant to do good things, you have to question, why am I working on this? How can I make it better? Not why am I working on this? Oh, I'm going to quit and go live on a mountain somewhere. It's not like that. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying you should really think about, how can I improve this system? What can I do to make this better? Whether it's improving it in a correctness fashion or improving it in a progressive fashion. Sometimes we wonder about things like protest. How can we use code and protest? How can we as developers protest when we find that we're in situations where things aren't good? Now, again, not a call to rebellion on your teams. If you disagree with your manager, you don't write code and protest. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is, how can you, again, do well by your systems and make sure that you're helping people to understand, like, hey, what we're developing here is to make progress, to make something better. We're really looking at the public good. And this is, again, a principle out of the ACM. One of the things it says is we have a responsibility to ensure that the public good is the central concern in everything that we build, in all of our professional work. And this includes users, customers, colleagues, other people affected directly or indirectly by what we build. We should always have an explicit consideration when evaluating these tasks associated with research, requirements analysis, development, implementation, testing, deployment, everything. We have to keep this focused no matter what methodology we use, whether we're using Agile or XP or mob programming or plain old waterfall. We have to be explicit when we're thinking about whether or not something is for the public good. So when's the last time we sat and looked at, I don't know, some Trello cards and thought, is this for the public good? We probably don't. I mean, let's face it, a lot of times we're thinking, like, we look at the Trello card and we say, I'm going to use this library and this one, and I'm probably going to do this, and right. You think about how you're going to make something happen. But we're not all good, and I include myself in this, we're not always good at being intentional for understanding whether or not something is for the public good. And one of the things that leaders have to do when you're leading your teams, you're managing teams, you're a lead engineer, whoever you are, you have to articulate, encourage acceptance of, and evaluate fulfillment of social responsibilities by members of your organization or group. That is what your leaders should do. That is what you should do within your teams. You have to articulate and be clear about this. So what does this mean for our code? Well, we have some ethics in innovative code where we have to look at the purpose and intent of our code. Sometimes we make claims to simplicity in our code, and I like to say we worship at the altar of complexity. We're like, oh, the more difficult something is to do, you think that this person must be super smart because it was very, very difficult to do. And now we're like, we've got to really make sure that this thing is so complex that we just flex our Scala muscle all over the place so that no one else can ever use the system again or use it in any way nice. I mean, we have to stop doing that. That's all of us. I mean, and that's not to say that some tasks aren't difficult by nature or some tasks aren't hard to complete. Things will be hard. Things will be difficult. But we don't want to make things intentionally obfuscated. That's not what we want to do. We want to write code that we know other people intend to look at and will use in the future. And that includes other people like yourself. How many times have you written something, you worked the entire day to write some code, and you thought you got it perfect, and you had a good night's sleep, and you get to work the next day and you open it up and you're like, what jerk wrote this code? And you're like, oh, that was me. I wrote that code just a day ago. You want to be smart about this. You want to really look at what you're writing and understand that you're writing it for other people to look at. And so you wrote some code, and that code is actually good, but that code is wrong. You don't want to write code that is good but wrong. What do I mean by good and wrong? Well, your code can be good, it can be excellent, it can do exactly what someone told you to do, but that thing that it's doing could be the wrong thing. And this could be just as innocent as I wrote some code that does exactly what this requirement told me to do, but somewhere down the line there was a mistranslation on the business side and this code is completely wrong. This is not what the business wanted at all. It could be something as simple as that, or it could be something nefarious. You could have written some really good code to do something really nefarious. So either way, you have to consider your code. But what about Scala? Scala actually wants you to do the right thing. Isn't that good? Why do I say Scala wants you to do the right thing? One, because Scala tries really hard to make sure that you're writing correct things. You have your typing and your types, and we use IDEs that help us to make code more pretty and readable and things like that. But when it comes to ethics, does Scala help us? Can we use Scala to achieve some ethical means? Is there a responsibility? I want you guys to hold that in your head as I continue on, because you are going to give the answer to that in a few moments. Ethics and innovation. So there are certain principles that we look at as Scala developers and developers everywhere within innovation that we have to actually question. There are things we say, we want to innovate quickly. We want to automate everything. We want code to run faster. We want to store more data. We want to support artificial augmented intelligence or augmented realities. But do we even consider the effect of these things? What does innovate quickly mean sometimes? Sometimes it means the pressure to go along. Sometimes innovate quickly means we need to hit a deadline. We need to do something first rather than write. And this is something that happens not only in our industry. We're not guilty alone in this. If you look at media today and you look at news outlets, it's more important to be first with the news rather than to have the news correct. It's more important to be the first person to say something or the first person to hear something. And we don't want to follow that trend in our esteemed profession. We're not journalists or something. We want things to be done correctly. We don't want to follow this pressure to just go along. We don't want to cut corners in quality. Again, this is an issue of ethics. And sometimes it's not you wanting to cut corners in quality. Sometimes there are external pressures, like I said, but we have to push against those pressures and resist the cutting corners in quality. And this is something that I'm sure other language users would probably crucify me for saying, coming from Scala, but you don't want to put breaking changes into your code. I know there was a big controversy between a couple of Scala versions where there were quite a few breaking changes, but we have evolved from that. And so I don't feel like we should intentionally put breaking changes in code. So that's our speed on innovation. Now I want to look at automating everything. Is that really something we want to do? So I'm gonna read this quote at length for you because it's a very, very pertinent quote. And this is one you may want to, like, if you can't write it down, maybe you can just like screenshot it or something like that, or take a quick picture so you can look at this later. And the book that it comes from is really good. And so this quote says, "I have said that this new development has unbound possibilities for good and evil." And this is regarding a form of computing. "For one thing, it makes the metaphorical dominance of the machines, as imagined by Samuel Butler, a most immediate and non-metaphorical problem. it makes this metaphorical dominance a non-metaphorical problem. It gives the human race a new and most effective collection of mechanical slaves to perform its labor. It may very well be a good thing for humanity to have the machine remove from it the need of menial and disagreeable tasks, or it may not. I do not know. This was written in 1948. Didn't you think it was like yesterday that somebody said this? Because it is exactly the same and worse. Can you imagine him looking at what we have today and saying this? And this paper is actually a really good paper that I would recommend reading about cybernetics. But the question of whether or not we should automate everything and whether machines should take away our menial tasks, it's an interesting question. You know, some people actually believe that this will bring about a utopia. They think if nobody has to work, nobody has to do any menial tasks, it's going to make us all, we're going to write poems, and we're going to write books, and we're going to do art, and we're going to enjoy the world. And I actually like that idea. I like this utopian idea that if we don't have any more work, the computers do everything for us, that I can just, you know, traipse through flowers and things like that. And that's my idea. But there's another category of people who believe it'll bring destruction in a dystopian society, and that people who are bored won't decide to write poems, they'll decide to terrorize other people or something like that. So somewhere in between is probably where the truth lies. But it's something that we should certainly question as we look to automate everything. And as we're looking to automate everything, and even if you think down into your code and the way you automate your testing, or you automate code building other code, you have to look at the integrity in the process. Who's maintaining integrity in that process? Who's a steward of the integrity? Who's a steward of that process? And it's something that you can't really ignore. We also have this idea that we're going to run our code faster. And what does that buy? That we're running it, you know, just a little bit faster, just a little bit faster. Are there times for slowing down code? There's actually a platform, a trading platform that automatically puts slowdowns in the code. There's an interesting book about this too, and it did it on purpose to make systems more fair. And what's really our responsibility in the core language? So in our core language, in Scala, is there a responsibility to employ ethics around running code faster? Or is that something that's part of a library, like some people have created? What do we think? Should we start with a baseline of everything as fast as it can possibly be? That's something to consider. Another thing is storing more data. We do store a ton of data. And what about the clandestine storing of data? And even now having libraries that help you store data much faster, store it much easier when you look at things like event sourcing. And not having as much emphasis on erasing data or forgetting people or archiving, not until GDPR or things like that. We have to be responsible for that. We have to determine whether or not we're building in things to our library that are going to be hard for us to reverse later, or hard for us to control when we look at privacy concerns and look at what people actually really want to share with the world. And then we have augmented and artificial intelligence. And this is something that is really a strong and powerful tool. And every time you have something that is strong and powerful, like Scala or Spark or any of the things that we work with that take data and do very important things with it, you have to imagine that people need huge responsibility, they need to have a huge level of responsibility to deal with that kind of stuff. It's like giving someone a very, very, very powerful tool and not training them on the dangers. You're only talking about the excellent things that this tool can do, and you're not talking about, well, you need to have some type of, you can't be too dangerous with it. And access to certain types of technology around AR, AI, is becoming really, really democratized by things like Scala, TensorFlow, even some of the Python libraries. it allows normal, everyday, soon to be commodity to do things like machine learning and AI. You have even AR for browsers. If you guys are familiar with Mozilla's project, WebXR, it used to be Web AR and Web AI or something like that, but it's combined, WebXR. It's a way for you and I to build augmented reality AI type applications right from the browser, phone-based and computer-based. And like I said, soon the ability to do both will be commodity. But is that a good thing? I think partially it's a good thing. I think it's always a good thing when we can give more people access to important tools. But we also have to think about the dangers and the things that can happen from that. What can happen if we're allowing certain technology into the hands of people without giving them the responsibility, without saying, hey, this is really cool to use, but the responsible way to use it is this. It's kind of like we should release libraries and have that subtitle on them that they have on all the beer commercials in the US. It's like everyone's having a fun, joyous time and jumping in pools and watching the game, but really small it says drink responsibly, right? It's always reminding you that you have to have some responsibility within all of the fun. We should create libraries where we, code responsibly at the bottom of it, let people know. So now I want to talk about some actual use cases that touch on some of the things that I talked about here. And to start with these use cases on what's really happened in our community, I want to start with a really, really interesting comic. And I've left the link there so that you can go and laugh at this again when you're at home. But there are some things as developers and as just human beings that we consider so sacred that we don't even trust ourselves to do it. And if you think about this very hilarious comic, everyone, it's so true. You ask someone about airplanes and, oh man, is it safe? They've got computers and Wi-Fi. Oh no, airplanes are the safest thing since safety, safe. What about, elevators? No, super safe, like fail safe, super duper safe. And you're like, well, what about computerized voting? No! You can never, ever do that. It's so unsafe. No. My best line, hate to tell you this, but we're really, really bad at what we do, right? We don't trust ourselves in certain realms. And it's so interesting because I have heard this in real life so many times before I saw this comic, and I was like, man, that's spot on. Has anyone else heard that before? Everyone's super freaked out about the idea of voting with computers, right? And so we do have some underlying sense of whether or not we're doing the right thing sometimes. And like I said, this voting thing becomes really sacred. So here's a use case about a company. This company is called Cambridge Analytica. Anyone heard of Cambridge Analytica? Okay, so you guys know the story, right? So this company, they collected massive amounts of data under sort of false pretense. But what if they had been honest about why they were collecting that data? What if they had been honest about what they were doing, right? They used this data to create prediction algorithms to basically influence election results in the US. But I would ask, how is influencing the election results using data any different from the way that they do it with attack ads or taking out ads in the newspaper or on TV or whatever? What's the big difference there between the two? I could say, really, to me, one of the big differences that I see is that with enough data and with some smart people manipulating that data, it became very effective at doing it. And although we cry and we scream and we say, man, that was really wrong, no one should do that, you shouldn't be able to do that, is it that you shouldn't be able to do that, or is it that you shouldn't be able to do that so well? Did we suddenly become man, when it's an ad on TV, we think, oh, we're kind of immune to that. that doesn't affect us. But when someone really takes a personal measure to change the way we think, and this idea that, oh, I was personally tricked, we have this outrage that we think is some moral or ethical outrage to be born in us. But really, we have to just think about the tool and the power that was behind the tool that was used. Whether it went from influencing people to influencing a group of people to go buy a burger at a burger joint, like, oh, go to Five Guys. You see the commercial and you're like, oh yeah, I do kind of want Five Guys. You don't feel that it got you. But if someone was in your ear, Kiki, go to Five Guys, go to Five Guys. And you didn't know it, and then you play back a reel and you saw someone telling you like, oh my God, you were telling me the whole time to go to Five Guys? Like, I'm so mad. That's kind of what happened here. And so it really made people angry. It's for us to discuss after. We can consider whether or not you guys think that was wrong or unethical. But if we think, to me, if we think that this is something that's wrong, then we have to evaluate the entire way that we're doing personalization and ads and our intents and purposes behind all of it. And whether or not it's okay to influence people to do some things like buy a burger and not influence them, and not okay to influence them and do some things like vote for this person or that person. There's another use case, and this one is very interesting. Anyone familiar with the Los Angeles Police Department? LAPD? Anyone familiar with LAPD ever doing any like bad things? Sometimes, big nods, right? Sometimes they do bad things. Well, the LAPD has a very interesting project going on right now where they're collecting large amounts of data on criminal activity in certain areas in LA. And they're using that data to predict who's going to commit crimes, and they're going to like check in on those people like a lot. And so since they've implemented this software, and it's a very interesting software that they have in a very interesting way, a methodology that they've gone about to even get this data. But since they've started this project, a number of people have complained like, man, I'm getting stopped like every other day. Like police are stopping me like 5 times a day. Like one will stop me and I'll get down the street and another one will stop me. And they had no idea that this project was going on. But apparently they're collecting all this data, which is kind of, it's kind of self-circular data because it's on certain people and certain historical crime. And so of course it's going to predict within that same data set who's going to commit a crime. And all it does is get people to go and bother them all the time. And so there's a big ethical question around, should you be able to build software and use software to do that? If you're using software for data prediction, where are you getting that data? Are you getting a large enough group of data? How is it collected? Who controls the algorithms? And again, who's maintaining the integrity of the code in that system? Just think about how something like this could be used. If you're predicting who will commit a crime based on poor data, and you're harassing normal citizens of a free country based on some algorithm that could be possibly wrong, could be right, could be wrong. But you're making a really big decision there, and that's not something that should be taken lightly. And I do believe that data should be used in order to help keep our citizens and citizens of every country safe. It's really a good thing, and it could be a positive thing. But you have to deploy these systems the right way. So what do we do now before you guys hoist your doubts and such upon me? I think that we have individual responsibility. First thing I think we should do, all of us, is to take a look at that ACM Code of Ethics. It actually is, it's pretty short. It's like a page, maybe a page and a half or something like that. It's not that long. And it describes things that I think that we should all think about in our individual community, society, as people, as leaders, as professionals. And we need to be intentional about understanding our own biases and safeguarding ourselves, our projects, the things that we work on from that. We need to always, again, write code as if some monster is going to need to use it at some point, because one day you may need to use it. And we've all got a little bit of a monster in us. And for society, we need to actually look at, again, those systems that are really becoming a part of society and the things that we're building. This is not an abstract matter, right? I mean, there are people in the room who work for Paytm and Shopify and banking, and I mean, you affect people every day. Everything that you do is very important and is part of the fabric of our society. What do we do with our code? Do we, this is a question, have a responsibility to create safeguards against unethical behavior? Is that something that we can put in our code? Is there some way we can put checks and balances? Is there a way to slow down bad actors or to stop? You cannot always stop. I feel like, sometimes you can't always stop something, but can you slow it down? Can we investigate and research tools or libraries or things that can be created either within the core language or within libraries to do that, to achieve this balance? If we go back to the Cambridge Analytica, just quickly, the guy who masterminded it, he calls himself the mastermind, he eventually he blew the whistle. And one of the reasons he said he blew the whistle was because he didn't realize how powerful it was. He's like, oh, I made this thing and I didn't realize that it was going to be this powerful, this bad. And it was all about, I mean, this is his claim, but being ignorant of the power that he had with the code. That's something that we need to instill in people, that knowledge that yes, you can make things that are very beautiful and very elegant and do great things, but they can also do destructive things. And you have to educate people on that power itself. So now is the time where you can lob your things up. Any questions?
I have a comment.
Yes.
So I want to talk about Cambridge because that really pissed me off.
Yeah.
After the victory, Cambridge Analytica put together a slide deck for internal use that leaked. And in that slide deck, they revealed that they trialed 35,000 advertisements using machine learning, personalized. But they actually weren't advertisements. They were either integrations to paid advertising platforms like political hosts, or they were comments in free forums made by stand-up accounts, which is pretty close to propaganda. But even the paid advertisement platforms where you can insert dynamic data, programmers built it, but it was a business model that dictated it. So it was executives that laid it out, and they would have fired those programmers and got other ones. So how do you combat business models that are unethical, that are powered by our technology?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a really good question. For those of you who didn't hear, I'm going to repeat it because it's so good. The question is, the heart of the question is, how do you push back when you have executives making decisions about the code that you need to create and you know that it's probably going to be doing a bad thing? Like with Cambridge Analytica, it was creating propaganda and it was creating a lot of untruths. So that becomes a question of whether you're going to push back on ethical boundaries or not. You're like, I have a job, I have bills, I don't live for free, I need to work. What can I do? And one of the things that I would do is you have to provide transparency, and sometimes you have to make people articulate what they're trying to do and make them understand that you know what they're doing, and sometimes they will roll back on that. So if you actually force someone to say, okay, so we're going to do this and we're doing it for this reason, and can you explain to me this? And if they come out of their mouth and they know that they're explicitly telling you, I'm explicitly telling you to do something wrong, and they realize that you see that it's wrong, sometimes they will either ask someone else to do it or they will figure out another way to get this thing done. I would personally try to force them to figure out another way to do it that doesn't include me, because you don't want to lose your job, but you also don't want to be in a position where you don't want to be in a position where you're doing something that you don't feel good about inside, or that you don't think is for the public good. And there are a lot of gray lines, and there's a lot of balance there. Like sometimes you may think, well, if someone's in debt, then why do I keep giving them credit? You know, that's not a good thing. That's not for the public good. We're increasing the debt of this country and people and blah, 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 blah. Maybe you think I don't want to keep giving people credit. So, I mean, a lot of that becomes your own internal compass that you have to decide on. But my advice is if you feel very strongly about something, I would resist. And we have ways to resist. I mean, we're the ones who write in the code. We're the developers. We can resist. If they said build this algorithm, make it do this, do that, okay, we're doing this. But I'm also, hey guys, just to let you know, I've put this here and there to erase a certain degree of bias and blah, 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 blah. And I'll tell them like this. Then you have to force them to say like, no, I want it to be biased, right? You walk them into the corner into what they want to do. That was a good question. Any other questions on that? Or any other comments? It's not like just questions, discussions, any comments. Anybody have like a story to share about a friend, not yourself? Yeah.
I just got a thought, maybe for debate internally. So the LAPD example is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because they failed in the final mile. Like, to me, that became unethical. Like, it may have been ethical work for data scientists all the way up to harassing people. Like, there's another version of that. I believe it was in Canada where they collected data from every prisoner in Canada. And so rather than like focus on where crimes are committed, they're focusing on where criminals were from, right? And then they're predicting that this is actually where we need more community services, not to go in and carve, but hey, maybe there's
Exactly.
a community center that can be built there to get people, you know, away from that life really early. So I think like if you looked at LAPD versus that, probably like 90% of the work is really just very similar until that final round.
Absolutely, and that's why I was saying that you can always use this data to do good or bad. And I actually had that example, I remember that example where basically, in case you guys didn't hear, Kevin was saying that there was a community in Canada that did the same thing where they were looking and seeing where crime happened and where criminals were from and predicting where you may have trouble. And instead of going to catch people in the act of doing something bad, they actually did something preventative, which, you know, prevention is much better. And that then becomes a positive thing, a positive way to use the data and look at it. Rather than going to harass someone, you're preventing it by creating community services or perhaps economic opportunities that may not have existed, things to fight against nihilism. I mean, that's actually a really great example. Any other comments?
I think there are cases where developers or engineers are even more aware of certain ethical issues. And I'm thinking of something like accessibility, web accessibility, where you could have product managers setting requirements and they're often just unaware, they're new to the field or this is their first web product they're building. And I see all the time, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in this room, but those types of issues of fairness and access are very kind of the first things that we sort of shut to the side.
Absolutely. No, that's so true. A lot of times people don't think about accessibility, readable sites or sites that your computer can read to you. Sometimes people don't think about color blindness, making sure that people can see things. I mean, there's a lot of things that we tend to ignore, and sometimes it is out of ignorance. And so, again, it's our responsibility to try to bring those things to light when we see it, when we see an opportunity to bring that up. It's a very good point. So I think I'm all out of time here. If you guys have any other questions, you can always contact me. I'm Kiki@lightbend.com or Kiki's World Race on Twitter. Thank you.